So next speaker, Mindy Regnell. Mindy, are you here? Join me on the stage. So Mindy is going to tell us about what to do when we hear something about a competitor.
Yeah.
Welcome, Mindy.
Great to be here. So excited to be chatting with y'all. If I look like I'm randomly looking up, blame my multiple monitor setup. Want to be able to see the questions as they come in and my presentation at the same time. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to share my screen.
See my hopefully smooth transition this time. Oh, right. Beautiful.
I tested this like multiple times this morning because I'm just one of those have to like test all the things type people. So right. I'm going to go from the process from going from rumor to rollout, what I consider to be the 7 steps that I use in the life cycle of a claim. So to get started, just a quick introduction. My name is Mindy Regnell. My pronouns are she, her, and I'm a senior market intelligence manager at Postscript. I've been in e-commerce now for about 14 years, and I've been doing CI for about 5 years. Competitive intelligence, market intelligence, I tend to use those terms interchangeably. The reason for that is just when you're speaking with folks internally, they largely know that you're looking at what's going on in your competitor landscape, but the market is also a big factor in that. So I find market intelligence to be a little bit more of a holistic term. It's also, as much as I know we've talked about competitive intelligence being slightly taboo, it's still slightly taboo. So it's easier for me to talk to customers and work with other folks outside of my organization when I use a little bit of a softer term to kind of describe what I'm looking at. So I'm the former manager of global competitive intelligence and analyst relations at BigCommerce. I'm an avid quilter and an all-around nerd. And just to give you guys a quick bit of information about Postscript, if you've never heard of us, we're the leading SMS marketing provider for brands on Shopify and Shopify Plus. When done right, SMS marketing can be a real game changer for brands, but there's just such a fine line between being successful and really annoying people. We're super passionate about preventing the latter, and we help brands design and operate SMS programs that keep users engaged and drive revenue. So let's take a look at setting the stage here. So our customers are faced with a difficult choice. I've built out competitive claims companies at several different programs, at several different companies I've worked at. And since a lot of my specific claims are very much still actively being used in market, I'm going to go a little off the beaten path and use a really nerdy alternative to walk through my process. I promise you don't have to be an expert on Pokemon to follow along. But if you aren't familiar at a high level, the goal of the game is to have your Pokemon battle against other trainers who have their own Pokemon and ultimately prove your talents and catch as many Pokemon as you can. In order to get started, you have to first choose your starter Pokemon. Our customers are making a similar choice in a very crowded market. There are just lots of options. They can look fairly similar, they can feel pretty distinctive, but sometimes they're not. And this can be really overwhelming. And people might find that what they start with isn't the best long-term solution. So I work at Postscript. We love flame emojis. So we're just going to go ahead and we're going to use Team Charmander as my example here. So how do we go about best positioning Charmander in this competitive market? So when you're in a competitive market with well-established competitors, you're going to want to have a process to build out claims on why your platform is a superior choice. We want to make sure that individuals making this choice for the first time or individuals that are using a competitor see the light, switch to Team Charmander, and let's drive things forward for our business. So let's dive into why have a process. Often companies are competing in incredibly crowded, fast markets, and things just move super duper fast. I felt like things move fast in e-commerce. Things move even faster when you move into the ecosystem. So with that in mind, I want to level set. It's really important to keep in mind that success is going to look different from one company to another. This is a process that I've used at both a private company, a publicly traded company, and that squishy space in between when a private company becomes a publicly traded company. Since going public is often the goal for a lot of companies, I'm going to go ahead and lean a little bit more heavily on things you might want to consider when you're living in that space between. So I'm a big fan of having a process for several reasons. One, having a process allows you to establish alignment with your key stakeholders. you want to make sure you get the right folks involved when you're building out this process. Generally, I've found that means making sure your marketing team, your competitive intelligence / market intelligence team, and potentially your sales team are represented in building this out. The bigger, more established company you are, if you're already a publicly traded company or thinking about going public, this alignment is going to be critical. Building out this process ultimately allows you to reduce potential legal risk. What you're saying in the market, especially as a publicly traded company, matters. There can even be legal consequences for making inaccurate or false statements. Oftentimes, this can be the main driver of why companies go about building out and having a process, but it shouldn't be the only factor. Building out this process also lets you think about how do you go about enabling your teams. You might find that different teams need and want different information. So when you have that process in mind, you can start figuring out how to fork and divide different information. One of the best pieces of conversations I saw happening on LinkedIn about a week ago was your product team and your sales and marketing team generally want different information. Sales and marketing are looking to go out and crush and win some deals. Product is looking more strategically, long-term. Are there gaps? Are there things that we should be doing that we're not right now? So last, building trust in the market through accuracy. I don't want to say that you can easily understate the importance of this, but having accuracy is super, super important. How you speak about your competitors really, really matters, and where you're talking about your competitors really matters. When you're talking in a one-off individual sales conversation, you're talking under NDA, there's a lot more squiggle and squishy space to kind of work with. When you're dealing with marketing collateral, things that are on a public-facing website, people expect you to be accurate and have your ducks in a row. It's really important to be accurate. You're going to build and lose trust by having things right or having things wrong. So if you've ever run a competitive intelligence program, you've probably experienced this. To Jason's point earlier, competitive intelligence is such a team sport. I am a firm believer that you want to get these messages. In fact, you probably want to get them a lot. So don't discount that you're going to be the first person to find everything. You're not. You're just not. There's so much going on out in the market. There are just going to be things that you're hearing about, things that might still be in beta, things that are changing, use cases that you might not have thought of that you're going to hear from various different sources. So how do you go from that random one-off Slack message to an actual claim that exists in marketing? So let's dive into the process here. And pardon my love of Charmander, and I'm just going to clarify. This is probably not a claim I would make in marketing. It's at a publicly traded company. It's got a lot of very aggressive verbiage. It might be hard to prove, but you can make similar type arguments. So before we get too far into the details, again, level setting on this expectation. Building out this process is not always going to be fast. The first time you establish a new process, you're going to find all sorts of little things that you might not have thought about before. So you're going to want to keep your lines of communication with your core stakeholders open and evaluate success and reset expectations. So as you think about how you deal with these claims, know that it's going to get better over time. And again, that risk sensitivity is going to be such a critical piece of how you think about whether or not you're being successful. So don't panic. There is a process. So looking at this here, you're not always going to make it through every 7 step of this process. There are just going to be points where things fall off. That's okay. That's part of why you have a process. So the first thing that you're going to want to do is review. You're going to need to decide, is this worth digging into? Then you're going to investigate. You're going to want to validate and find out whether or not what you're hearing is true. I know there's the feeling of when there's smoke, there's fire, but that isn't always the case. So that's why proper investigation is super critical. Then you're going to want to document. Having things for future reference or for that legal review is going to be super important. If not, just because things are going to change and you're going to want to be able to reference back to it later. Next, you're going to go through your legal review. When you have this process, you're going to want to have a legally approved claim. Not everything needs to be a legally approved claim, but if you're going to put it on those high touch areas that are external facing that can impact your trust, you're going to want to make sure that your legal team feels comfortable with your statements. If you get stuck here, there are plenty of ways to go around it, and not everything has to go through a legal review. If it's just an additional update, something that your sales team needs to know about because something has changed, you're just going to want to make sure that you get that in the hands of your field and update your internal documentation accordingly. Then you're going to want to update your resources, roll it out to the field, and get ready to decide where this gets used in your overall marketing strategy. So let's take a look at that Slack message. It could be anything. I could have heard about a competitor doesn't have a specific feature, or the feature doesn't work the way the customer is looking for, or it could be negative. Not everything is going to be positive. Not everything's going to be negative. Sometimes it's neutral, and that's okay. So before you get started, how do I go about thinking about this claim? And again, this is going to impact whether or not this is a new process for you and you're flexing this muscle for the first time. Is this new? I'm a big believer that I would rather hear about something 10 to 100 times than not hear about it. And I know, as Jason said, sometimes you feel like you get flooded with information, and especially when you're getting new in a space or you're dealing with a new competitor, it can often feel overwhelming. So when you feel like you get a lot of new information at the same time, you're going to want to go down through some of these other questions and start sorting out the best way to move forward. So as you've done this over time, you're going to find that this is information that you've already investigated. Maybe it's something you already know. Maybe it's something you've heard before, but it's a slightly different use case. Is this something that you looked into maybe 6 months ago and there just wasn't enough information to really come to a conclusion, and move forward from there? And then, is this credible? And I don't mean to say that I don't trust my customer facing reps, but you're going to get people that are sharing something that they randomly saw on Twitter, or, there are just different levels of reliability and the level of knowledge that you would expect from a particular source. If it's just a customer who's evaluating using your services for the first time, right? They've never used SMS marketing before, and they're looking at you and a couple other competitors, they're probably not going to know what they don't know. And that's going to be really different from somebody who's been using a competitor for a really long time, or an industry analyst or another expert in the space. As you get really moving down, you're going to find that you're going to be forced to answer two really important questions before you take the time to dive in. Will this move the needle, and do I have the bandwidth to take this on? When you think about hearing something interesting that could be related to a specific feature or something on the roadmap, you're going to oftentimes maybe have enough time to take a quick look, a cursory glance, do a quick search, and it's not going to be something that you fully have the time to manage. If it's something that sounds mission critical and it's really interesting and you have the ability to reprioritize what you're working on, this is how you kind of factor that in. So let's just take a moment to touch on what happens if you're being fed information that's negative. So this process can still be useful, and you're still going to go through the investigation steps. You're probably not going to write up a claim for your legal team to review. You're probably just going to align with your stakeholders and feed that information over to different teams. Probably your product and engineering team wants to know a little bit more about a potential gap. And then you're going to make sure that your folks internally know those potential landmines that might come up in a sales cycle. If you have an alternative solution or a way to work around it or a way to combat that objection, that's going to be important information to document, even though you're not going to use it in your marketing process. So I use this process for all sorts of different ways of tackling information. So now it's time to investigate. I've decided that this information is worth looking into, and I love this part of the process. It's really undefined. I feel like it's going down rabbit holes. You don't really know what you're going to find, if anything, or how long it will take. It's daunting. But some of the best things that you find are just that one lead. I like to think of it, and I'm a total sewer, so I like to think of it as pulling at threads. When you find something and you've got a little bit there, just keep pulling on that thread. You don't know how far you can push it. You can take a claim that you heard that maybe sounds like, I don't know, that feels a little too good to be true. Can I unravel it? Can I do the math? Can I break down exactly what that's saying and go a little bit farther? So the next thing you're going to want to do, and there's a million different places where you could start looking for information, is if you have a legal review process, I highly recommend sticking to sources that your legal team is going to feel comfortable with if you want to turn this into an external facing claim. So you can look at your competitor website, see what they're talking about, their pricing page, their feature page, use help centers. If you're looking for specific information about a feature, how it works, often help centers outline like specific limitations because users actually need to know what they are. So use the information that users of a platform would be looking at to really understand it. I love even looking at API documentations, and I can't code. I can kind of read API documentation. And if you find yourself in that same boat, find a friend internally and start working on this together. You don't have to go it alone, and you probably shouldn't. If you get kind of a high level idea, you can't really find the right spot in a help center or an article, do a quick high level Google search. Again, try to stick to reputable sources. If it's just a third-party review from somebody who doesn't look like they've used a particular service before, I'm going to like turn off my camera here and return it back on because I look like I awkwardly froze there. Don't use those if your legal team isn't going to accept them. Third-party reviews are often heavily influenced by affiliates. So you want to make sure that you're looking at what's accurate. Is somebody a partner? Have they used this platform before? That having been said, even when it's affiliate driven and platforms have the ability to speak to their strengths and weaknesses, they have to admit their weaknesses. So sometimes they'll be a little obvious, but sometimes they'll be the weaknesses that are a little bit less aggressive or dangerous. So at the end of this process, you're going to want to feel confident that there's something of value and that you can prove it. Next, you're going to go ahead and you're going to take the time to document it. Again, if you have a legal review process, you're going to want to think about how you go about documenting this with legal in mind. And your legal team is going to want very different information than what your internal stakeholders are going to care about. You're going to want to think about writing out that claim. How did you get there? Are there any disclaimers that you're going to need to add in your external marketing? I find that if it's not clear cut and I can't just point to, hey, it's right here on my competitor's pricing page that they don't have this feature, or this feature is in a specific plan, or it's really clear cut in help documentation, it helps to write down your methodology. If you're making a claim about being more flexible, more open, that you're more extensible, if you're using terms that don't make sense to folks outside of your industry who might be looking at a claim, take a couple minutes and define it. Defining those terms can make it a lot easier for you to build and walk through exactly what you're looking for. One of the claims that I wrote at a very high level was very specific to API openness and whether or not code was specifically publicly available. So for that to work, I actually defined, okay, what do all of these words that I'm using in my claim that a developer cares deeply about mean to somebody who's not a developer, so that you can see how I got there. It helps to have a cheat sheet for future reference. Save the link, save the page that you found it. If your legal team is super risk sensitive, it helps to upload those pages to Wayback Machine so you can have them for future reference. Make sure you get sign off from your legal team. Claims are super important. Competitor claims are exceptionally high risk. Alignment early is going to do you a lot of good. This is a picture of Elliot, my head of legal at Postscript. We've worked really closely to build and align on a process. If you get stuck, there are plenty of ways to get through this. And this will get better over time. You're going to have to build rapport and build trust with your legal team, and you're going to find out together what works well for both of you. Again, this isn't a process that companies have just to make your life painful. They have them because there's specific risk that they're concerned about. So what do you do if you get stuck in that legal claims graveyard? This can happen for all sorts of reasons. You can have a lack of alignment. You just don't have the right people involved. You maybe didn't write things out clearly in your backup documentation, or you didn't explain it very well. Try not to have, aggressive or hurt feelings here. You're just going to want to re-level set and keep building that relationship. Not having a defined process can make things really weird. If everything's a marketing claim, it's just going to take longer. My advice when you find yourself in this situation where there's just a high sensitivity to risk is to encourage writing and thinking through the process of what's most risky. Is something an individual sales rep is saying on a one-off deal super risky compared to something on the homepage of your website? Probably not. Is a statement about a competitor lacking a specific feature, or you're the only one with a specific use case or thing that you're solving for, more aggressive than, let's say, talking about a trend in the industry, right? COVID had a big impact on e-commerce, and physical buildings are, shutting their doors as a result. That's pretty low risk compared to me saying a competitor doesn't do something else. So figure out ways that you can streamline that process and get alignment. If you get stuck here, the big question to ask is this worth it? Your business team and your legal team have to agree. And this can often mean getting the right stakeholders back in the room to move forward. Again, internal resources, this is where information lives. When you think about creating this, there are lots of places that you can put these little nuggets of information that you found. Guru cards, battle cards, feature comparison chart. If you have a pretty involved and lengthy legal claims process, I recommend having a claims tracker. It just makes it really easy for you to go back, find the claim, find the link to your backup, and have all of that handy. When you think about a specific claim, individual features and onesie-twosie things in very crowded markets largely aren't going to move the needle. You're going to want to think about, how does this fit into your overarching narrative? If we're thinking about our choices of Squirtle, Bulbasaur, and Charmander, you're going to want to think, hey, how do I tell people that Charmander is just more trustworthy than Squirtle? We're an advisor, we're a partner, we're going to level up and we're going to tackle this together. Those specific claims that you're finding that tie back to those overarching themes is often the way to go. But you're still going to want to figure out where you put that information and make sure that your teams understand any weird nuances or complexity. Then you're going to think about rolling out to that team. Now you've got it ready, it's all documented, the resources are ready to go. You're going to decide if this requires a full update, or if you're going to, share this in Slack, a CI newsletter. You're going to share this during updates with teams. I find Loom videos can be really helpful if you really want to explain or walk through something. Some people do better just hearing information than reading it. And if it's a really big deal, or if it's related to a larger theme, a full training in your learning system can be really helpful. Just a couple pieces of advice here, and I know this can be really tempting. Don't confuse how hard it was to get a claim approved by legal with how big of an effort and rollout is required. Be clear in setting your expectations around information that can be shared in customer conversations. If you've got a really good detailed piece of information and there's just a lot of technical nuance, your teams internally might need to understand that technical nuance if additional questions come up, versus questions that your customers are going to want to know right away. So keep that in mind. And I would also say it's really important, make sure that your voice and tone are kept in mind. The way that you talk about your competitors matters. Most people don't want to deal with a company that's running around trash talking somebody else. Yes, this is the world of Pokemon. You've been using Bulbasaur or Squirtle, and they're just not cutting it. I don't want to run around and make it sound like you made a bad choice. I want to help you see that Team Charmander is the way to go, and we're going to help you take it to that next level. And that's just a different way that you're talking about it and making sure that you have that alignment, especially in early stage startups where this is a new exercise for a lot of folks. Finally, using those claims in marketing. As I've mentioned, more often than not, these are going to be supporting an overarching narrative as opposed to like individual onesie-twosie claims that go on your website. If you're using things in marketing, refer back to that legal process. You're going to want to make sure you have a time frame at which you're checking to make sure that it's still accurate. If you get caught and somebody says, oh, well, they fixed this 6 months ago, it's not a positive look. So try and stay ahead of it and keep your claims fresh. Measuring success can be really tricky with this process. So find a way that works best for your team. Are you surveying? Are you getting an idea of comfort level? Do they feel more comfortable? Do they understand those questions? Are they coming up? And that's pretty much my process in a nutshell. I will stop screen sharing here so we can ask questions.
Boom. Mindy, thank you so much. This was absolutely the most detailed claim addressing piece of content I've ever witnessed in my life.
Oh man, I'm
impressed.
A lot of claims at both companies, and I can tell you, if you haven't had this process in place and you start through the process of going public, you're going to find yourself in a lot of pain and implementing this very quickly. So it's better to get a jump start.
Totally. So, from a small business perspective, this seems like overkill. It's like way too much. So is there like a leveling up ladder, or like, how do you know where are you, how much should you do at what stage of the company?
So I would say when you're a relatively small company and you're talking about your competitors, you're going to find through just the experience of making claims and making statements, which things are going to get you a little bit more heat, and working really closely with your legal team. So your legal team is going to know, and generally in a startup, they're a little bit more flexible around what constitutes a claim versus what doesn't. I wrote a lot more claim backup at BigCommerce as a publicly traded company than I probably will do at a private company right now. And so having that and making sure that like you're really focusing on the ones that are most important and most likely to get somebody to say, hey, wait a second, I don't believe you.
Not all claims are the same, because like you can, miss the forest for the trees, so to speak, where somebody makes a claim that is about like, a minor feature or whatever thing, right? So, really should be ignored, and we should not devote our energy. So how do you distinguish between claims that actually deserve our attention versus, whirlwind?
Yeah, so I think about it in terms of where you're going to use that information. So if it's going to live on your marketing website and you're going to be very aggressive, very specific, you're going to name names and you're going to say that they do or don't do something, that's probably when you want to take the time to have your ducks in a row and have it documented. I save content, I throw it all into a folder, I have it, I know that I'm going to come back and reevaluate it 6 months from now. And that can just be, as long as you have the links to where you found it, it's super simple to just reopen it, reskim that page, okay, box checked, we're still good, and move forward. And folks in the field are going to find out if somebody released a feature. Most customers are pretty understanding that if something changed and you didn't immediately update your marketing collateral, like, you're fine. If you start getting past that 3-month window when you haven't kept things current, that's when you start eroding trust, in my experience.
Gotcha. And Jarvis is asking, what system do you use as your claims tracker?
I am pretty old school, Google Sheet. I just have a column. I've got my, here's my claim, here's what category it's in, here's when it was reviewed, here's who approved it. You can just add more columns as you get more complex. More often than not, you're just looking at what's the claim, are there any asterisks, link to the backup, date approved, and if it needs a reevaluation date. And then usually I tag the competitor.
It's interesting. We're talking about competitive strategy in Intel, and usually people say, hey, Excel is everybody's biggest competitor, and there you go, using spreadsheets.
I don't know. I'm very used to bootstrapping it and doing CI on a very low budget. So as much as as Jason pointed out, Google Alerts can be overwhelming. I get like 20 Google Alerts every day.
Gotcha. Well, I appreciate you, Mindy. Thank you so much for sharing your knowledge with us.
Yeah, and if anybody wants to nerd out or talk about specific templates, feel free to hit me up on LinkedIn. I am overly passionate about this subject.
Wonderful, wonderful. Everybody follow Mindy on LinkedIn. We'll see you on the other side.